There's a specific feeling I get when someone at work mentions their salary casually, like it's nothing, like they're just telling me what they had for lunch. Oh yeah, I'm at $95 K right now, trying to get to 6 figures by next year. And I smile and nod and say something like, oh, that's great. And then I spend the rest of the day feeling weird about it. Not jealous exactly, just off. Like I'd witnessed something slightly private. Like I'd accidentally walked in on someone. I grew up not knowing a single number that mattered. I didn't know what my parents made. I didn't know if we had savings. I didn't know if the house was ours or the bank's. I knew we weren't starving. I mean, there was always rice, always some leftover kung so no my mum made on Sundays in the big blue pot. But beyond that, total blackout. Financial silence so complete I didn't even notice it until I was 24 years old, sitting across from an HR rep during my first real salary negotiation, realizing I had absolutely no internal number to anchor to. No reference point. Nothing. My therapist would later call this money silence. I just called it normal. Here's the scene I keep coming back to. I'm maybe 11. We're at 99 Ranch, which if you know, you know. It's a Saturday, it's crowded, there's that smell of dried seafood near the entrance, and my mum is comparing 2 bottles of oyster sauce like her life depends on it. I ask her. I don't even know why I asked. Maybe I'd been talking to a friend at school. I ask her, Mum, how much money do we have? She doesn't look up from the oyster sauce. Enough, she says. But like, how much is enough? She puts 1 bottle back, puts the other in the cart. We have enough. Don't ask again. And that was it. Case closed. The subject had been raised and immediately buried, and I was left with this vague, floating sense that money was something serious and also something I was not allowed to touch. Not literally. Conceptually. Money was a room in the house with the door shut. You knew it was there. You didn't go in. My dad was the same way, maybe worse. My dad's idea of a financial education was telling me to study hard and not waste food. Once, I found a bank statement on the kitchen table, which, looking back, might have been the most vulnerable thing that ever happened in our household. And before I could even register what I was seeing, he had scooped it up and put it in a drawer. No explanation, just gone. And I think I was supposed to understand that I wasn't supposed to have seen it. What I didn't understand then, and what took me an embarrassingly long time to understand, is that this wasn't just my family being weird or secretive. This is a pattern. Specifically, it's a pattern that behavioral finance researchers call a money script, which is basically an unconscious belief about money that gets installed in you during childhood and then quietly runs in the background for the rest of your life, shaping every financial decision you make without you ever realizing it's happening. The specific script my family handed me was something like, money is private. Talking about money is shameful. How much you have is no one's business, including yours. And I believed it, completely, without question. Because when you grow up inside something, you think it's air. You don't notice you're breathing it. What I've been trying to figure out, and honestly I'm still figuring it out, is where that script came from. Because my parents didn't just decide one day to be secretive. That's not how this works. My parents came here from Guangdong province in the late 80s with not a lot. My mum has told me, on the rare occasion she talks about it at all, that when she first got to the US, she was working at a restaurant in Flushing and making something like $300 a week. She shared an apartment with 4 other women. She sent money home when she could. That's the context. Not paranoia. Survival. When you are that close to not having enough, money stops being a casual topic. It becomes charged. It becomes loaded with everything that could go wrong. and you protect the information about it the way you'd protect anything fragile, by not letting anyone near it. My parents never fully shed that posture, even after things got more stable. The vigilance became permanent. The silence became default. And at some point, I think, the silence also became a way of protecting me. If I didn't know how close to the edge we sometimes were, I wouldn't worry. If I didn't know the numbers couldn't scare me. What they didn't account for is that the silence is its own kind of scary. Maybe scarier. Because when there are no numbers, your brain fills in the blanks. And if your parents seem stressed, if you've noticed your mum pauses before agreeing to buy something, if you've seen your dad do the thing where he stares at a bill for a long time before putting it away, then your brain starts generating numbers, and the numbers it generates are usually bad. Usually, we're about to lose everything. Usually catastrophic. I spent most of my 20s operating with that low hum of catastrophic assumption underneath everything, making decent money genuinely by most measures, and still feeling the specific anxiety of someone who doesn't know if the floor is solid. Every time my bank account dipped, I'd feel something almost physical. Not just concern, dread. The kind that doesn't scale with the actual situation. A $200 overdraft fee once sent me into a spiral that lasted a week. Not because $200 was going to ruin me. It wasn't. But because somewhere underneath my actual balance was this shadow balance, the one my nervous system kept. And that balance was always lower, always almost zero, always almost not enough. That's a scarcity mindset, that specific flavor of it. The kind that isn't about your current reality at all, it's about an inherited one. There's a researcher named Brad Klontz. He's a financial psychologist who has done a lot of work on money scripts and where they come from. And one of the things he talks about is how money scripts tend to originate in emotionally intense moments or in periods of sustained financial stress that a family went through, and then they get passed down. Not through explicit teaching, through atmosphere, through what doesn't get said. Through the oyster sauce moment and the bank statement in the drawer and the enough, don't ask again. He also says something that kind of broke my brain a little when I first heard it. He says money scripts aren't pathological. They were adaptive. They worked, once, in some context. The problem is they tend to stick around long after the context has changed. My parents' money silence made sense in Flushing in 1989. It doesn't make the same sense for me in a mid-sized American city in my late 20s with a 401k and a credit score I actually understand. But my nervous system hasn't fully gotten that memo. And neither, I think, has theirs. Last Thanksgiving, I tried to bring it up. Not in a confrontational way. I'd thought about this. I'd literally practiced what I was going to say. We were cleaning up after dinner, just me and my mum, and I said something like, "Hey, I've been thinking about your retirement. Like, do you guys have a plan? I want to make sure." She handed me a container of leftover turnip cake to put in the fridge and said, "Don't worry about us. I'm not worried, I just want to. We're fine." And she changed the subject. So smooth, so fast, that for a second I thought I'd imagined the whole exchange. That's when I started realizing something that felt important. That the silence isn't just a relic of the past, it's still active, still protecting something. And the thing it might be protecting now isn't just vulnerability about money. It might be protecting a story they've built about themselves, about who they are in this family. My dad came here with less than $200 in his pocket. He says this sometimes, not to brag. More like a prayer, he says to himself. A reminder. He worked double shifts at a restaurant on Canal Street for 3 years before he could afford to move us out of the one-bedroom apartment where all 4 of us slept in the same room. And at some point, maybe around the time he could finally buy a car, something shifted. He became the person who handled it, who figured it out, who didn't need help. Telling me what's in his bank account would undo some of that, even if I'm asking out of love. I think about what it cost them to get here. Not just financially, I mean the daily indignity of not understanding things. Forms you can't read. Phone calls you're afraid to make. My mum once told me that when I was little, she would practice conversations before calling the phone company. Full scripts, written down in a mix of English and Pinyin, so she wouldn't get flustered. She was terrified of sounding stupid, of being taken advantage of because her accent gave her away. So they learned to manage everything internally, to ask for as little help as possible from anyone, because needing help had consequences they'd already lived through. And then I came along, born here, English perfect, knowing how to talk to people on the phone without writing a script first. And they did everything they could to make sure I would never feel what they felt. Never be in that position. That meant keeping the worry away from me. It meant performing competence, even on the days when they weren't competent, especially on those days. The silence wasn't coldness. It was protection. I'm crying a little writing this, honestly. But here's the thing. That same silence that protected me when I was 8 is now getting in the way when I'm 28. Because I'm not a kid they need to shelter anymore. I'm an adult who actually has tools they might not know about. And we're both stuck in a dynamic that made sense once and doesn't quite fit anymore. I started thinking about what I actually could do. Not to fix them. I'd already made the mistake of going in with that energy, but to figure out my own situation first. Because part of why those conversations were so loaded for me is that I wasn't standing on very solid ground myself. I had a 401k through work that I'd been contributing to at the minimum. Just enough to get the employer match, 3%. I'd never looked at what it was actually invested in. I opened the account dashboard one night and spent maybe 40 minutes reading about target date funds, and I realized I'd been sitting in the default option my company chose, which was fine, but I didn't even know I had a choice. I upped my contribution to 8%. That felt scary in a way that was embarrassing. I kept thinking about what my parents would say if they knew I was putting more money somewhere I couldn't touch. That's the phrase that always comes up. Money you can't touch. My dad says it like it's obviously bad. But I kept reading, and the math on compound growth over 30 years is the kind of thing that makes you want to sit very quietly by yourself for a while. Then the Roth IRA. I'd heard about it. I'd nodded along when people mentioned it. I had absolutely no idea what I was doing. What I finally understood, after reading the same explainer article probably 4 times, is that it's an account where you put in money you've already paid taxes on, and then it grows, and when you take it out in retirement, you pay nothing. No taxes. My income was under the limit, so I was eligible. I opened one at Fidelity, contributed $500, and then stared at it for a week without actually investing it because I didn't know what to put it in. This is the part nobody tells you, that you can put money in a Roth IRA and it just sits there as cash unless you choose investments. So it's not just opening the account. You have to go back in and tell it what to do with the money. I put it in a total market index fund. Low expense ratio. That's it. That's the whole move. Nothing fancy. The credit stuff I'd actually figured out a few years earlier, mostly out of necessity. My parents didn't have US credit history when they arrived, so there was nothing to inherit or learn from. My mum paid cash for almost everything until I was in college. No credit card debt, which sounds responsible. And in some ways it was. But it also meant she had almost no credit history, which caused problems later when they needed to refinance the house. I'd started building my own credit at 22 by getting a secured card, putting one small recurring charge on it, paying it off in full every month. Boring. Slow. It worked. My score's around 780 now. I mention this not to be obnoxious about it, but because I remember feeling like credit was this mysterious thing no one had taught me, and it turned out to be genuinely not that complicated once someone explained the basics. The HSA I only started using last year. If you have a high deductible health plan through work, you can put money into a health savings account before taxes. It grows tax-free, and you can withdraw it tax-free for medical expenses. If you invest the money and don't touch it, it can actually function like a retirement account. After 65, you can use it for anything. I'd been ignoring mine because the contribution felt optional, and optional things are easy to skip. Now I max it out. $3,850 a year for single coverage, which sounds like a lot, but broken into bi-weekly paycheck deductions, it becomes manageable. None of this is heroic. I'm describing spreadsheet decisions. But what it gave me, slowly, was a feeling I didn't have a word for at first. Something like standing up straighter. I went back to that conversation with my mum. Not immediately. I gave it a few months. And I went in differently this time. Less here's what we need to do, more just being honest. I said, I don't need you to tell me your bank account number. I just want to know that if something happened, I'd know where to look. One folder, one conversation. I told her I had a folder for my own stuff. I told her what was in it. My login information, my account names, where I kept my insurance card. Just modeling it, not pushing. She listened. She didn't change the subject. She didn't say yes either. But she listened, and she asked me one question. Your Baba doesn't know how to do that stuff online. And I said I knew, and I could help whenever they were ready. That was 6 months ago. Last month, she sent me a WeChat message with a photo of a paper she'd written. It had 3 account names on it, and a phone number for their financial institution, and a note that said, in Chinese, for May if something happens. Her handwriting. That's small. I printed it out and put it in my folder. I don't know how to explain what it felt like to hold that piece of paper. It was like something that had been braced for a long time, finally let itself rest. Like we'd both been carrying the same thing from different sides without being able to say so. And we just put it down, quietly, without making a big deal of it. The silence isn't gone. It probably won't go completely. There are things my parents will never tell me, and I've stopped needing them to. What changed is that I stopped treating the silence as a wall and started understanding it as something they built, carefully, for specific reasons, at a time in their lives when they had very few other options. I can respect that. I can love them inside it. And I can also decide not to pass it down. The patterns we grow up in feel like personality. They feel like just the way things are. It took me an embarrassingly long time to understand that my physical reaction to looking at my own bank balance, that low-level dread, that thing where I'd rather not know, wasn't about me being bad at money. It was a learned response, something I absorbed. And if I absorbed it, I can also, slowly, choose something different. It doesn't happen in one conversation. It doesn't happen when you open a Roth IRA. It happens in the small moments. The time you check your balance without flinching, the time you ask a question about money without apologizing for asking, the time you realize you've been thinking about your finances like someone who expects to be okay. That's where I am now. Not fixed, just different than I was. If this hit close to home, you're not alone, and you're not stuck repeating it. Subscribe for more stories about money, family, and the quiet patterns that shape how we live. See you in the next one.